Hi guys, welcome back. In this video, we're going to be solving the recent paper that A2 students gave, that is from May-June 2026, paper 32. Without wasting any time, let's get started. Question number 1, which says, when do consumers maximize utility under the equi-margin principle? Pretty simple question. The correct answer has to be C for Charlie, when the marginal utility per dollar is the same for each good, because under the equi-margin principle, a consumer would maximize total utility when the MU per unit of your dollar spent is equal across all the goods, which makes C as the correct answer. Simply MUX over P of X equals MUY over P of Y. Question number 2. So this is the marginal condition. Question number 2. What is the likely reason for a firm to remain small? To diversify the product range? No, this would be wrong, because diversifying the product range would usually require more resources and may encourage growth. So that is not the correct answer. B says to decrease average fixed costs. That is wrong as well, because fixed costs would usually fall when output would rise. So this is not, this is a reason to grow, not actually remain small, because average fixed cost would go down, right? So this is like a scaling up thing. When you scale up, your AFC goes down. So it's saying what is likely to be a reason. So the answer is to provide better customer service, because firms could know their customers better, respond quickly to individual needs, and provide customized product or services. And we have already studied this, that this is useful in those markets where the quality of service would matter more than large scale production. Question number 3 says a firm is located in an industrial area of a city. The diagram shows the average total cost curves for this firm. The firm is initially producing on ATC1 at an output of Q1. What is the most likely effect of improved transport infrastructure to this industrial area on the firm's average total cost? Now, improved transport infrastructure is an external economies of scale. So when there's an external economy of scale, it reduces the cost for all the firms in that industrial area. It would reduce the average cost for all the firms in that industrial area, which would mean that at the same scale of output at Q1, the average total cost will fall, which means that your average total cost would now be C3, right? At the same output level of Q1, right? So the answer has to be C3, which is it falls to C3. B for boy is the correct answer for question number 3. Question number 4, the table shows the marginal cost and benefits of the last unit of output produced for 4 goods A, B, C, D. Which good is not causing a market failure? So you have like MPC, marginal external cost, marginal private benefit, and marginal external benefit given. Let me take out my calculator because I'll need to calculate some values. The question is saying what is not causing a market failure. So what is not causing? So market failure will not be caused when MSC equals MSB. So we need to calculate MSC, which would be MPB plus MPC plus MEC, marginal external cost. So the answer, by looking at it, I can identify it's B, because 10 plus 5, this would be 15 is the marginal social cost, while the marginal private benefit is 5, while the marginal external benefit is 10. So MSB is 15. So MSB equals MSB equals MSC. 15 equals 15, which makes boy as the correct answer for question number 4. Question number 5 says what must be found in 2 markets for price discrimination to be profitable? Okay. Now we have already studied it under the conditions of price discrimination, that price discrimination is profitable when a firm can charge different prices to obviously different groups of consumers. That's exactly what makes price discrimination as profitable, and produces surplus rises and so does profits. So this would work best when the groups have different price elasticity of demand, because the firm could charge a higher price to those groups with more inelastic demand, obviously because they're less responsive, while it could charge lower prices to those groups with more elastic demand because you're sensitive. So that makes A as the correct answer. Question number 6 says the table contains information about a perfectly competitive firm which produces where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. By how much would the monthly profit of the business change in the short run if it chooses to shut down immediately? Now let's calculate the current profit. So let's calculate the revenue. Revenue would be price times quantity. The price is $2 times the quantity is 20,000 units, which makes the revenue as 40,000. The variable cost, let's calculate that. It's 1.5 times 20,000, which is 30. This would be 30,000. as total variable cost. And so your contribution would be revenue minus your variable cost, which is 40,000 minus 30,000, which is like 10,000. Is your contribution, while the profit would be your contribution, which is 10,000 minus your fixed cost, which is 5,000. So 5,000 is basically the profit. Now what happens if the firm shuts down? If the firm shuts down, a fixed cost still have to be paid. You still have to pay the fixed cost. So if production would stop, your revenue would fall to zero. Your fixed cost would still have to be paid, which is 5,000. So your profit would be equal to negative fixed cost, which is negative 5,000. So originally the profit was how much? Originally the profit was 5,000. Original profit is 5,000. After you shut down, you still have to pay a fixed cost, which makes your profit negative, which is 5,000. So the change would be how much? The change would be the new profit minus the original profit. The new profit is 5,000, negative 5,000, minus the original profit, which is 5,000, which makes it minus 10,000. So the monthly profit falls by 10,000. It falls by how much would the monthly profit of the business change? It actually falls by 10,000, which makes boy as the correct answer for question number 6. Okay, question number 7. Now I want you to pay very close attention. Question number 7, there's a problem with question 7, but still I'm going to solve it, but I'm going to tell you what the problem is, but this question will hopefully be discounted. The diagram shows uses indifference curves and budget lines to examine the impact of a change in the price of wheat. A change in price shifts the consumption of maize and wheat from S to T. So this is your original budget line. This is your pivoted budget line, which means that the price is rising, right? And the original equilibrium is at S, and so S to T. S is this quantity of wheat Q1, and now you're consuming more wheat. So this is like you end up consuming more wheat. So your price is rising, but you consume more wheat, right? Which sort of makes it a Giffen good, right? Because the demand curve would be upward sloping for Giffen good. So it's a Giffen good for a fact, right? So the answer could be C or D, but based on this, so which combination explains what. But the problem with this question is there's a technical problem with this question. You have to understand that they're asking you to identify the substitution and the income effects. While if this is IC2, then you can't really draw a hypothetical or a shadow budget line on IC2, because the shadow budget line or a hypothetical budget line is drawn to decompose the substitution effect. You want to bifurcate the substitution effect, and when you bifurcate the substitution effect, you separate the substitution effect from the income effect. You need to keep the utility constant, the utility as same, and that could only happen at IC1. So the shadow budget line, the shadow budget line has to be drawn on the original indifference curve, which has to be parallel to the new budget line 2. Because obviously at budget line 2, when the price goes up, your real income falls. So you need to compensate, you need to give back that income. So you need to shift the budget line parallel outwards. So basically what's happening is, now S to U is the substitution effect, which is negative here, while U to T is the income effect. Although the substitution effect is negative, S to U is a negative substitution effect here, but the income effect is positive, which outweighs the negative substitution effect, and that's exactly what happens in a Giffen good. The income effect is so strong, it outweighs the substitution effect. So the income effect has to be U to T, which makes the consumption. So that is why the question is saying, so which means that the consumption, which means that the consumption is actually increasing from S to T. Now, but here they have not done this. They have actually drawn the shadow budget line or the hypothetical budget line on the new indifference curve IC2, which is incorrect, actually, technically incorrect. So this question will most probably be discounted. However, keeping that in mind, what might have run through their mind while drafting this question, which is sort of incorrect as well, but let me tell you what they have tried to do here. What they might have tried to do here is that they are trying to say that, oh, you know what, they're just asking you to, and they're actually asking you to identify the best possible options out of the 4. So A, B, and D are clearly incorrect, right? But if you look at option C, option C says, what is a Giffen good? and then, sorry, it says wheat is a given good, and then it says the income effect is shown by the shift from S to W. That is from S to W. So what they're trying to tell you is that if they're drawing the hypothetical budget line on IC2, they're trying to say, oh, you know what, a hypothetical budget line is drawn to, I bifurcate the substitution effect. So they're trying to say that, oh, you know what, W to T is the substitution effect, while S to W, which is a very strong income effect, is the income effect. So which makes the consumption go up from S to W. So this is what they're trying to do, which is incorrect. So this question will most probably be discounted. But even if it is not discounted, ideally it should. The correct answer for this question, which is incorrect, technically, but having said that, based on the answer options given A, B, and D, C is the best possible answer. But if this question is discounted, everyone would be marked correct, irrespective of whatever you have marked for this answer. Okay. Moving forward, question number 8 says, what is economic rent? Now, economic rent is simply any payment that is made to a factor of production or simply labor above its transfer earnings. So, and we know what transfer earnings are: the minimum amount, required to keep the labor in the current use. So, if you look at these answer options, economic rent is simply actual earnings minus your transfer earnings, right? So, the difference in pay, this is different. So A should be the correct answer. It says the amount paid above the lowest wage that is needed to keep a worker in employment. So yes, it is the amount paid above the lowest wage that is needed to keep a worker in the employment. D is also incorrect. I mean, D is basically the definition of transfer earnings, not economic rent. Anyways, question number 9, the government of a country wants to achieve a more equitable distribution of income. Which combination of policies would be effective in achieving this aim? So you have tax-free allowance and welfare benefits given, and universal benefits and means tested benefits are given. And ideally what's happening, so if you increase the income tax allowance, right, if you increase the income tax allowance, it would help low income earners because they would end up keeping more of their income before the tax starts. So A and B are incorrect, so answer has to either come from C or D. And if you look at option number C, it says increasing means tested benefit, which would mean that would also target support towards those with lower incomes, and hence together these policies would end up reducing income inequality and creating a more equitable distribution of income, which makes C for Charlie as the correct answer. Question number 10 says, what is an advantage of creation of property rights? Solution to externalities resulting from river pollution. So if you're polluting the river and if you create property rights, so it actually means that you're giving people or firms legal rights over resources such as, let's say, a river. Now, what happens is that if a firm would pollute the river and would end up harming others, so those who are affected nearby could end up potentially claiming compensation or take legal action against the firm. And what it will do, obviously, it will help the firms would consider now external cost as part of private decision making, because private sector firms don't consider external cost as part of private decision making. Now they would, right? And if you look at option B, it says it always makes the polluter pay for the pollution cost. This, I mean, see, the thing is, it does not always make the polluter pay, because Option B says it always makes the polluter pay for the pollution cost. It does not always make the polluter pay. I mean, legal enforcement and legally enforcing this could be difficult, and negotiating this could be very difficult as well. So option B makes it incorrect. So it's not the best possible answer because it says always makes the polluter pay. I mean, legal enforcement of this could be difficult, right? So and even the negotiation of this could be difficult. So that's what makes B incorrect. Option C is wrong because property rights, it says it results in better monitoring. So it's wrong because property rights are more about legal ownership and compensation. They're not about that. They don't necessarily, means better government monitoring. D, it will eliminate pollution completely. This is wrong because pollution will be reduced, but it will not necessarily be eliminated completely, which makes A is only left. So A is the correct answer. But A is the correct answer because I told you that now it would help external costs become part of private decision making. So it would allow the possibility of a claim for compensation to those harms. That's an advantage of creating a property right. Because if you look at the definition of externalities, it says that it affects the third parties without them being compensated. But this now legally allows a claim for compensation to those harms. So that's what makes A as the correct answer. Question number 11, a chemical firm produces toxic fumes that impose a cost on society. The diagram shows the free market equilibrium of the firm's product at P1, Q1. So at Q1, the firm is, MPC equals MPB, so that's a free market outcome. The free market outcome is at Q1 because the firm ignores the external cost. If factors external cost into account, the socially optimum outcome would be at Q2, assuming MPB equals MSB as well. But how would this improve resource allocation if a tax is imposed based? It will obviously it will internalize. There's no external benefit. So it will internalize the external cost. So 11 boy should be the correct answer. A tax of XY would, raise the private cost. So the MPC would actually move closer or at the MSC. The firm would sort of internalize the externality and face the true social cost of production. So that's make boy as the correct answer, and output will fall to Q2 to the socio-optimum level. Question number 12 says, what would help a trade union to negotiate an increase in the wage rate of its members without causing a reduction in the number employed? So option A says, if the labor costs are a major proportion of total cost. Now, if the labor costs are a major proportion of total cost, a wage rise would obviously greatly or highly increase the production cost. So firms would most likely cut employment. So this is incorrect. B says, if the demand for labor employed is elastic, if the demand for labor is elastic, firms would respond very strongly to a wage rise by reducing the employment. So this is incorrect. C is also wrong because labor demand for a good is elastic, and higher costs would result in higher prices of the goods, which may reduce sales significantly, which will, force the firms to need fewer workers. D is the correct answer, and the reason is that trade unions, by rule, trade unions can raise wages without reducing employment. A trade union can, the only way trade unions can increase wages without reducing employment is when the demand for the labor is simultaneously also increasing, right? So firms, if the demand for final goods is increasing, and that would increase the demand for labor, firms will need more workers. Even at high wage rates, firms would now need workers. So the wage can rise without employment falling. That's what makes D for David as the correct answer. Question 13, which statement relating to the distinction between broad money and narrow money is correct? Now, the narrow money, that includes the most liquid forms of money, such as, you can say, notes, coins, and current account balances. Now, broad money would include your narrow money plus, let's say, less liquid deposits like, savings accounts, right? And both narrow money and broad money can actually store your purchasing power over time. So both can act as a store of value, because both can store your purchasing power over time. So both can act as a store of value. It makes A correct. B is wrong, because B says broad money does not include. Broad money does not include all financial assets. Shares and long-term bonds are not usually counted as broad money. So this is incorrect as well, right? So the rest of the answer options are wrong as well. Governments exercise direct control over narrow money but have no influence over broad money. This is wrong, because governments and central banks can influence broad money through interest rates, or let's say reserve requirements, or credit controls and open market operations. So this is incorrect as well, right? So okay, narrow money consists of notes and coins only. This is incorrect as well, because narrow money is not only about notes and coins. It usually includes those immediately accessible bank deposits. Question 14 says, so answer for 13 is alpha. Question 14 says, the quantity theory of money states, and this is such a goddamn simple question. It's written in the front of the answer option has to be D, the total volume of transactions. So T means the number or the volume of transactions taking place in the economy. Question 15, an open economy has a large negative output gap, and CIG and net exports was less than full employment potential. What type of unemployment is like? This is again a very simple question. If you have a large output gap and actual aggregate demand is below the level of aggregate demand or spending needed for full employment, it means that the economy is producing below potential. Firms are selling less. Their inventories are being wasted, so they hence need fewer workers, and unemployment would rise, and because of insufficient AD, insufficient spending, lack of AD, lack of demand, and that unemployment would be cyclical demand deficit unemployment, which makes A for alpha the correct answer. Question 16, let me take out my calculator. In a closed economy, households pay 0.2 in tax for every $1 increase in their gross income and spend 3/4 of every increase in their disposable income. Okay, what is the value of the multiplier? If you want to find out the value of the multiplier, so first we actually need to calculate the MPC out of gross income here, right? So the question is saying for every $1 earned, 0.2 is paid in tax. And so if 0.2 is paid in tax, the disposable income increases by 0.8 then for every $1. For every $1 increase in gross income, disposable income would go up by 0.8 because 0.2 is taxed. Right, then it says households spend 3/4 of every increase in their disposable income. So disposable income is going up by 3/4. It means that households would spend how much? They would spend 3/4 of their disposable income, which is 0.8. So 3 divided by 4 times 0.8 would be how much? It would be 0.6, which means that MPC, because they are spending this, so MPC, which means that for every $1 increase in the gross income, MPC, the marginal propensity to consume, is 0.6. So MPC is 0.6. Now apply the formula for the multiplier, which is 1 upon 1 minus MPC, 1 upon 1 minus 0.6. And if you calculate this should be 2.5, which makes C, boy, as the correct answer. Question number 17. What is not likely to increase the natural rate of unemployment? Now, natural rate of unemployment would include your frictional unemployment and it would include your structural unemployment as well. It does not include cyclical unemployment, right? So, if you look at option number A, technological development, it's saying what is not likely. So it's not likely. It's a distractor given or a trap in the MCQ. So if you look at option number A, technological developments lead to mismatch between skills of workers and requirements of employers. This is incorrect because this would create structural unemployment, and structural unemployment is a part of natural rate of unemployment. B says the introduction of minimum wage legislation. A higher minimum wage would actually create, real wage unemployment. We already know that. If wages are pushed above the equilibrium, so this can actually increase the natural rate of unemployment. So this is incorrect as well. C says workers delaying job search because they have enough savings. So this would increase frictional unemployment. If workers are delaying searching for jobs because they have enough savings, this is actually increasing frictional unemployment. Frictional unemployment is part of natural rate. So natural rate would rise in option C. It says what is not likely to increase the natural rate of unemployment. So it leaves us with D as the correct answer. Workers losing their jobs because of general decline in economic act. But D is also correct because the reason why D is correct is because workers losing job because of general decline in economic activity is experiencing cyclical unemployment. The economy is experiencing cyclical unemployment, and this occurs because of a fall in AD during a recession. So, cyclical unemployment is not part of natural rate of unemployment. So this will definitely not increase the natural rate of unemployment. Got it? Now moving on to the next question. Question number 18 says an economy experiences an increase in employment, unemployment, and real GDP. What is most likely to explain this outcome? So let's see. So employment is going up. At the same time, unemployment is also going up. And real GDP is also going up. Okay, now this sort of seems a bit contradictory at the first glance because we normally expect unemployment to fall when employment is rising, but both can actually increase at the same time only when your labor force is growing, because labor force would include employed plus unemployed. Now, if you look at the which means that your answer option boy would be correct, because you see, if you look at actual growth means your real GDP is going up, while potential growth, sorry for the writing, potential growth means your productive capacity in the economy is increasing, and this would happen, productive capacity could increase when your labor force grows in size, or let's say more workers enter the job market, or your population grows, or let's say immigration of workers goes up, or your skills and productivity enhances, so productive capacity could go up. So if productive capacity is enhancing, that doesn't really explains employment could go up as well, because although your productive capacity is enhancing, and whether that would result in a rise in employment or not would only be possible if your actual GDP is equal to potential GDP. So the actual status of employment or unemployment is reflected or manifested through actual GDP or actual output, not through potential output. what I'm trying to say to you is that if potential output is growing, it is very likely that unemployment could go up, especially if your level of aggregate spending or aggregate demand or actual output is not equal to that potential output, right? So the fact that employment is increasing means that actual output is increasing, which means that real GDP is increasing also means actual growth or actual growth or actual output is growing, actual GDP is rising. But the fact that unemployment is simultaneously increasing could be a situation where your potential output is more than actual output. Actually, your potential output grows by more extent than actual output, right? So the economy is experiencing, the answer option is B for boy. The economy is experiencing actual as well as potential growth. It simply means that maybe the size of the labor force grows up, and those extensive workers that we now have, we have a higher labor force, but a lot of them, or maybe some of them, are not really employed right now, so we still have unemployed workers. So yeah, that explains why 18 boy is the correct answer. Question number 19 says pessimistic consumers and entrepreneurs. So both are pessimistic. They hoard the cash rather than invest or spend, even when the rate of interest has become very low. This is looking like a situation of a deep recession. What does this describe? Now, this basically describes a liquidity trap, because a liquidity trap would occur when interest rates become extremely low and people still prefer to hold the cash rather than, spend or invest. And in this question, you're given that consumers are pessimistic, entrepreneurs are pessimistic, and interest rates are already very, very low, and people are hoarding the cash instead of spending. So, this is the classic explanation or definition of a liquidity trap. Question number 20, the diagram shows the Laffer curve. You have x and y. Which combination correctly identifies? Pretty simple question. This is, I guess, repeated from the past papers as well. The correct answer is to be C for Charlie. Your horizontal axis represents your tax rate and vertical axis tax revenue, because the Laffer curve simply shows the relationship between tax rates and government tax revenue, as explained by Arthur Laffer. Question number 21, the graph shows the consumer prices and unemployment for a country between 2002 and 2007. What can be concluded from the graphs? Between 2003 and 2004, unemployment and prices moved in the same direction. This is wrong, because between 2003 and 2004, unemployment fell, and the rate of unemployment fell, while prices were rising between 2003 and 2004. If you can see, the consumer price percentage is falling, but still prices are rising, because you're experiencing disinflation, because this is the percentage, not the absolute prices. So as long as the percentage is positive, prices are rising. So they do not move in the same direction. Unemployment was falling, because unemployment as a percentage of between 2003 and 2004, the unemployment as a percentage of labor force is going down. So the percentage is going down. So your unemployment fell while your prices rose. So they did not move in the same direction. Option B says prices were at the lowest in 2004. Prices were not at their lowest in 2004, because in 2004 the percentage increase in price was the lowest, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't really reflects or tells us anything about absolute prices, because these are percentage changes, not absolute prices. So we can't really decipher from this. It doesn't mean that prices were at the lowest in 2004 just because the rate of decline was the lowest. So prices were still rising, although at a slower rate, but they were still positive. These values, percentage changes, are above zero. And by the way, even if the percentage increase is at the lowest, that doesn't mean that the prices were at the lowest as well, because these aren't really reflecting absolute values. The correct answer has to be C for Charlie. Prices rose continuously over the period, because you see, throughout this period, the percentage increase in prices has been positive. So prices rose continuously throughout the period. The economy is basically experiencing disinflation, which is inflation at a declining rate, but still prices were rising. Question 22 says, other things being equal, what is likely to result from a reduction in interest rates in the country? Now, when interest rates would fall, what would happen? The correct answer has to be D for David, because your returns on savings are falling. So financial assets in the country are becoming less attractive now. So foreign investors would sort of move their money out of the country in search of higher returns. So it would result in an outflow of short-term capital. So there would be an outflow, hot money outflow, which is recorded as a debit in the financial account of the BOP. So the correct answer to question number 22 has to be D for David. What is most likely to decrease as a result of 2 years of falling real GDP? 2 years of falling real GDP would suggest a very weak aggregate demand and spending, and a very weak or lower economic activity. If consumers and firms are spending less because of this, there is likely very less upward pressure on prices, because there's no I mean, there's lack of demand. So technically, AD is falling, right? So demand per inflation is most likely to decrease. What is most likely to decrease here? Demand per inflation. Cyclical unemployment is likely to increase, not decrease. So yeah, the rest are incorrect as well. Pretty simple. Question number 24 says in the diagram the curve x1 shows an economy's initial. So this is a Phillips curve. What does a shift of the curve from x1 to x2 show? Now the Phillips curve we know show an inverse relation between unemployment and rate of inflation. And technically, when the Phillips curve shifts outwards, the whole trade-off, it shows a trade-off, right? So the whole trade-off is moved to the right. This means that at every inflation rate, if your unemployment was U1, now your unemployment is U2. Now at every inflation rate. So technically, this is suggesting that the economy's natural rate of unemployment is increasing, and this could happen because of structural problems such as skills mismatches, or there's more labor market immobility that is causing the natural rate of unemployment to increase, or maybe very strong trade unions, or very high minimum wages, or maybe government is giving very generous unemployment benefits or something like that. So that makes A for alpha as the correct answer. Question number 25 says, which action is open to a government to control the rate of decline in the value of the currency and improve the current account of the balance of payment? So you want to control the rate of decline in the value of the currency and also improve the current account of the BOP, right? So if you look at option A, allow the country to float on the forex market. This is wrong because allowing the country to float gives the forex market more freedom rather than directly controlling the rate of decline, right? If you look at option number C, that would be wrong as well, because reducing subsidies to exporters would make exports less competitive and may worsen the current account, and you're trying to improve the current account. If you look at option number B, it says a fixed. Now, see, moving from a floating exchange rate to fixed exchange rate lower than the current market rate. This is correct. Why? Because if the a fixed exchange rate which is below the current market rate means the government or the central bank is deliberately artificially setting the currency at a lower value, and this is actually known as controlled depreciation. Controlled depreciation, which is simply means devaluation, right? So and this can actually help improve the current account because exports would become cheaper as the price of exports goes down for foreign buyers, and imports would get expensive for domestic consumers. So it can actually control. So here the government or central bank is trying to control the rate of decline. The government is controlling the rate of decline because if left completely to the free market, the depreciation could go down to a massive extent. So this is controlled depreciation or devaluation. So you're controlling the rate of decline here by fixing the exchange rate because the currency is now fixed or pegged rather than left to fall freely. This would also improve the current account of the BOP, which makes boy as the correct answer. Question 26: a depreciation of a country's currency leads initially to the worsening of its trade balance. What would help explain this? Now this is sort of it's a J-curve question. This question is on your J-curve effect, because after a depreciation, or let's say even a devaluation, the trade balance may initially worsen before it improves, right? So depreciation would make your exports cheaper in the forex market as the price of exports goes down, and expensive in the domestic market. Your imports more expensive in the domestic market, right? But in the short run, the quantities for this will not really respond very quickly because contracts are fixed and they already exist. So consumers and firms both take time to switch. And firms may not be able to increase the export supply very quickly. Although the price of exports have gone down, but firms may not be able to increase the export supply very quickly. So if the supply of domestic exports is price inelastic, exporters cannot rapidly increase the quantity of exports, even though the exports have become cheaper abroad. So export revenue will not rise very quickly, right? Meanwhile, your import bill may actually rise because the price of imports have gone up. Imports now cost more in the domestic. Imports are costing more to us in the domestic currency, but the quantity of the imports is not really going down, right? So the import expenditures are worsening. So this will actually cause the trade balance to worsen initially. That's what makes D as the correct answer. This is a classic J-curve effect question. Question 26, D for David. Question 27 says the data shows figures extracted from 2020 UN Development Report. Now you have GNI per capita, purchasing power parity adjusted, Human Development Index, US, Australia, and then the HDIs are given. What could be concluded from the data? Australia has a higher living standard than US. Let's while this looks at the correct answer, if you look at option B, it says Australia has a lower inflation rate than USA. This is wrong because the data gives no information about inflation. C, the US has a bigger population. This is wrong because GNI per capita does not tell us the population size. D says the US has a greater national income than Australia. This is wrong as well because the US may have a greater total national income, but we can't really conclude that from the data given, because the data is giving us GNI per capita, which is gross national income divided by population. We don't really have the population in front of us. So although GNI per capita could be higher than in USA than Australia, but the total national income could be very much higher in Australia, while the population could be lower in USA. That's what gives GNI per capita of US more higher than Australia. So we can't really conclude that the US has a greater national income, and the total national income of US is greater than Australia's, unless we have the population in front of us and the individual national incomes in front of us as well, which makes A the correct answer. And A is the correct answer because Australia has a higher living standard than USA, because the HDI is a broader measure of living standards, because it considers not only the incomes but the GDP, the incomes, the education and life expectancy as well. So even though USA has a higher income per person, Australia has a higher overall HDI score, which suggests that Australia has a higher living standard according to the HDI measure. That's what makes A as the correct answer from the possible list that we have. So A is the best possible answer. Question 28. One year, the World Bank gave a loan of 650 to Angola to help stabilize the economy. The bank said Angola needed to have a fiscal policy that would encourage diversification of an economy. So maybe Angola's industry is too heavily dependent on a certain industry. Which policy would be consistent with this requirement? A would be incorrect because lowering interest rate is a monetary policy, not fiscal. B is wrong because regulations is a supply side policy, not fiscal. We're talking about fiscal policy here. C is also wrong because supporting the existing oil industry does not diversify the economy. It reinforces your dependence on oil, which makes D as the correct answer. And D is correct because the key phase here is diversification. So diversification of Angola means expanding into other sectors instead of in relying on one sector. So subsidizing tourist hotels supports the tourism sector. Subsidy is a government spending which is part of fiscal policy. This creates new source of output and incomes and export revenues outside of one particular dependent industry of Angola. So it's a fiscal policy because subsidy involves government spending. So D is the correct answer for question 28. Question 29 says what is most likely to happen when the economy develops. So if the economy would develop, if you look at option A, it would be correct. Pretty simple question. The proportion as countries would develop, employment would shift from the primary sector to the manufacturing and then towards service. So this would, because incomes are rising, people demand more. If incomes rise in a developing country, if incomes are rising, and average incomes are going up, so people would end up demanding more education, more healthcare, more transport, more entertainment, more finance, more professional services. So all of that spending would go up, which would increase the demand for those industries, and people would end up hiring workforce in those industries, which would mean that the proportion of workforce employed in the service sector will go up, because all those examples that I gave you right now are service sector examples. So service sector becomes normally a larger share of employment as development in the economy increases. Talking about development. Question number 30, the last question says if a country, so that's what makes 29A for alpha as the correct answer. 30 says if a country succeeds in attracting FDI in a single year, what is the result on the BOP in the short run? Okay, so FDIs it would result in a credit in the financial account, but FDI simply means foreign firms bringing capital into the country, right? So in the short run, this would be recorded as an inflow of funds as a credit in the financial account of the BOP. But in the long run, the effect on the current account is sort of uncertain. Why? Because FDI may improve the current. The thing about FDI is that FDI may improve the current account if it increases FDI could increase exports, right? So FDI could improve the current account because FDI could increase exports, or FDI could also reduce your imports as well. Remember, because maybe the country is producing very competitive goods, those multinationals are producing very competitive goods. So your current account could actually improve because of FDI. But having said that, it may also worsen the current account if foreign firms send back their profits abroad, which would represent income outflows, which means that the effect on the current account is actually uncertain, which means that 30C for Charlie is the correct answer, a credit in the financial account and uncertain in the current account. And with that, our paper also ends. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know in the comments what your scores are and we can discuss the things in the comments. I wish you all the best in your future for whatever you do in your life. Thank you so much for watching and all the best.